Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Monster Kid Radio. It is episode 649, and the podcast is the one devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. I'm your writer, host, producer, Derek M. Cook. Dig It. That's the name of the song that you're hearing right now. Dig It, from the band The Meteoroids. It's from their self-titled album that came out earlier this month. Go check them out at themeteoroids.bandcamp.com. Check out the entire album. Let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. You'll be hearing this song in its entirety at the end of this episode. Thanks for being here. Thanks for downloading the show. Thanks for checking us out, whether you are a longtime listener or dabbler or you just discovered the show for the very first time. Thank you for checking out the show. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Let people know about the show. If you're on any form of social media, please consider sharing posts and just spreading the word of Monster Kid Radio. Become part of the official Monster Kid Radio Cyber Street team. I'm looking to get things back to normal here on Monster Kid Radio. Well, Abby normal. And in doing so, I want to continue to grow the audience and get more people involved in the podcast. And the only way that can happen is if we let more people know about the podcast. We've been going for over a decade now, but there is still so much more room to grow. And I'm counting on you to help make that happen. But in the meantime, let's get you some content this week on the show. Now, I've talked about this over the past few episodes. I'm going to keep harping on it, so I apologize if you are a return listener and you're getting tired of hearing this. But Beth and I were supposed to be in Kuwait right now. We actually went to Kuwait to help open the region's first permanent haunted house attraction. Had a grand time. We were supposed to be there through March. Plans changed, things changed, and now I'm back home in the Pacific Northwest. Well, while I was gone, Steve Turek, despite his own issues, volunteered to record some episodes for us, and that's what we've got this week. I've got the third part of the Steve Turek, Kevin Slick, Dracula family reunion arc, collection, I don't know, series of episodes. Although it wasn't all in a row because I did break it up with a Terror of Mechagodzilla episode. You know what? It doesn't matter. Son of Dracula is what we're talking about this week here on the show. And when I say we, I mean Kevin and Steve. Big thanks to Steve Turek for stepping up. And once again, just reaching out to me when he heard that I was going to be gone for a little while and asking if he can do some work for Monster Kid Radio. I call it work, but, I didn't pay him. So he volunteered for Monster Kid Radio. And I appreciate that, sir. I really do. And I appreciate Kevin Slick, who you can write at kevinslick.com, for stepping up as well and recording with Steve about all things Dracula, Dracula's daughter, and this week's Son of Dracula. Now, of course, it would not be an episode of Monster Kid Radio if we didn't have some amazing segments like Kenny's Look at Famous Monsters of Filmland, and Mark Matzke keeps delivering the goods, man! He's talking about all things Ultraman. We are in the final stretch, I believe, of the Return of Ultraman, so we've got his beta capsule review where he's going to talk about episode, I think, 41 of the Return of Yeah, I think that's right. You know what? He's going to tell you, so stay tuned for that. But before we get to any of that, I actually got a little bit of feedback, and I cannot wait to share that with you here. This email comes from Wyatt. Greetings, Derek. My name's Wyatt. I've enjoyed your podcast for some time now. However, every horror podcast of old classic and not-so-classic horror movies I've looked through has not had one mention of Britain's first-ever horror star. Whom I am speaking of is none other than Mr. Murder himself, Todd Slaughter. One of his films, The Face at the Window from 1939, is a fantastic hidden gem. He's great in this, as he is a wonderful melodrama/horror actor. He's a bad guy doing it so well. He was a British actor who was pretty well known and regarded on stage, playing these same characters before mentioned. However, the director by the name of George King thought it would be a great idea to turn these melodrama plays, such as Murder in the Red Barn, into a feature-length film. During the 30s and 40s, Britain had this quota made for filmmakers that Britain had to make so many films in their country in a specific time frame, so that led to quote-unquote quota quickies. And that is exactly the kind of films George King directed Todd Slaughter in. Cheap, quick, and murderously good. Critics hated these murder films, but audiences loved them. Todd Slaughter even was known as Sweeney Todd for his portrayal of him in the 1935 film of the same name. He was also known as Mr. Murder, for he murdered so many people in these films. However, the main film here, and only actual quote-unquote horror film he made, was The Face at the Window. This film features a wolfman appearing at windows in the night howling, soon after the person who saw it would be found in the morning with a dagger in their back, dead. If you've not watched it yet, please do. You might just find a new favorite actor. Other films of his I will strongly suggest are The Crimes of Stephen Hawke and Horror Maniacs, both of which are on YouTube. These are borderline horror films, but are considered melodramas. Please do give yourself a treat and delve into the world of Todd Slaughter. P.S. Kino Lorber released a Blu-ray of The Face at the Window, a beautiful restoration. Another label did as well, Indicator. However, The Criminal Acts of Todd Slaughter is the actual release name, as it's a box set with 8 of his films restored wonderfully full of special features on Blu-ray. Sincerely, Wyatt. Well, Wyatt, thank you for writing in. I appreciate it. You know, if you want to be cool like Wyatt, email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com. And I appreciate this feedback so much. Now, we have not talked about a Todd Slaughter film proper here on the show. I'd like to. But this is a blind spot for me. Now, I know a few years ago, several years ago now at this point, Todd Slaughter did get represented or talked about a lot at the Monster Bash horror convention that happens twice a year out in Pennsylvania. And I was definitely curious. I learned about a guy that I knew nothing about. I'm fascinated by the guy, what I know. But again, I don't know that much. And I think part of it is because he's British. And while he might have been working the same time that Karloff and Lugosi and them were, they just didn't get a lot of play over here at that time. And a lot of them have actually fallen into public domain, which sometimes can be really, really good. Like with the Night of the Living Dead film, you know, that one public domain, which means you can see it everywhere. But other times it means that the transfers and the prints aren't really in the best shape and they don't get the highlight or the attention they deserve, which is really cool to hear that The Face at the Window's got this awesome restoration. I'm definitely interested in learning more about Todd Slaughter. I will check out The Face at the Window. I believe that in the past when we were doing the Twitch stream and we were showing movies, because so many of these movies were in the public domain, I was showing a lot of them there over at twitch.tv/monsterkidradio. Now, I'm not bringing that back yet. Still trying to get my life figured out since we've been back from Kuwait. But I do plan on bringing back the Twitch stream at some point, and when I do, I can tell you right now, we are definitely going to have a Todd Slaughter weekend where we just play nothing but Todd Slaughter films. I think that would be a lot of fun to do. Wyatt, again, thank you for writing in. I appreciate it, man. I really do. And again, monsterkidradio@gmail.com is the email address you want to use if you want to send anything out to us. Or if you want to call us, you can also call and leave us a voicemail at area code 360-524-2484. All right, I think the Meteoroids need a break, so I'm going to let them finish their song, and we're going to get into the rest of the show, and I'll talk to you again at the end. Here we go.
The history of civilization is filled with legends. Legends of oppression, legends of cruelty, legends of beauty, and legends of strength. And the most fantastic of all legendary figures was the Son of Samson. Only the Son of Samson could have been capable of the superhuman feats of strength credited to this giant who conquered man and beast to redeem a tortured race from the clutches of its enslavers. Only the Son of Samson could have withstood the enticing beauty of the bewitching Delilah of his moment in history. The magnificent spectacle of this era comes to you in blazing color and total scope, with a cast of thousands, headed by Mark Forrest and Cello Alonso. Excitement surpassing anything ever before seen on the screen. Intrigue tautly woven into a fabric of suspense. Sultry, impassioned romance as torrid as the Sahara sun that stirs the blood of these desert people. This is a motion picture spectacular beyond belief. In color and total scope, you must see Son of Samson.
All right, are we ready for this conference now?
We have got to name the new Blob picture. Carol Lindley, Godfrey Cambridge, and Shelley Berman are in it.
Is it the same old blobby red Vaseline stuff that eats people and spits out the clothes?
Yeah, that's it. So what do we call it?
The same old blobby red Vaseline stuff that eats people and spits out.
How about Bless the Beast and the Blob? I just love it.
Fiddler on the Blob.
Gidget meets the Blob.
Guess the blob's age and win your life.
Blob Squad.
Oh, the blob's a slob.
Beyond the Valley of the Planet of the Blob.
Whatever
The funny
happened to
thing
Baby
happened
Blob?
on the way to
the
Blob
eats you.
The Blob Father. Golly gee, kids, be the first in your neighborhood to have your own Name the Blob picture contest. Son of Blob has already been taken. Oh yeah, the first prize is 1 week in Burbank. Second prize, 2 weeks in lovely downtown Burbank. Son of Blob rated GP.
Because everyone gets killed with their clothes on.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Return of Ultraman, Episode 42, The Monster That Stands on Mount Fuji. Original air date, January 28, 1972. In the vicinity of Mount Fuji, both motorists and hikers begin to have accidents caused by an altered sense of vision. Go is sent to the Mystery Zone to investigate and is immediately involved in a head-on collision. He avoids injury by leaping from the car and learns from the other driver, who is hospitalized, that it appeared to him that Go was the one swerving between lanes. A local meteorologist tells Go that the accidents only happen when a cloud cap covers the summit of Mount Fuji, and the forecaster is proven correct when Go observes both the cloud cap and an explosive two-car accident. Firing a laser into the cloud, Go discovers a gigantic monster which threatens a nearby village. Monster attack team arrives by air, but Kaiju Paragon bends the pilot's vision, causing two of their planes to collide. Regrouping on the ground, MAT is confronted by Alien Stora from Galaxy System 7, who admits to releasing Paragon in hopes of eradicating humanity. The next day, MAT launches an attack on Paragon, but the monster's ability to scramble radar causes Kishida to launch missiles on the village, as well as his own team. Go throws himself into harm's way and transforms into Ultraman, but there won't be much of a fight if he cannot locate the light-bending monster. Episode 42 is yet another installment of Return of Ultraman to feature beautiful location photography, this time spotlighting Mount Fuji, Japan's most familiar symbol. The volcano, topping out at 12,388 feet, last blew its top in 1707, covering the streets of Tokyo with ash. The mountain, iconic in every sense, has served as a monster battleground throughout the history of Japanese sci-fi and fantasy film, including, but not limited to, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, and Godzilla Final Wars. It serves the same purpose here, the result being a visually appealing entry in the series. This might have been a classic episode if there had been more time devoted to the fallout from Kishida's friendly fire missile bombardment, as it's suggested it could spell the end of MAT. But the monster that stands on Mount Fuji is more about the scenery and the spectacle. And there's plenty of both to enjoy. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
As a man, I could destroy him. But as a scientist, I should do everything in my power to bring him back to conscious life.
Benson, turn on the generator. Produced on a vast scale, Son of Frankenstein presents the most fearsome cast in the history of the screen. The Wrathbone. In his heart, warm human emotions. In his mind, the monster mania. Karloff, rising from the past to spread new terror. Lugosi, sinister, mysterious, evil. Lionel Atwill, grim hatred in his blood.
By heaven, I think you're a worse fiend than your father. Where is this monster? Where is he? I'll stay by your side until you confess. And if you don't, I'll feed you to the villagers.
The mightiest monster the world has ever known. The mightiest egg the world has ever known. Introducing the Son of Godzilla. The fantastic red water, one of the many weird natural phenomena on mysterious Sorgel Island. A great scientific experiment begins.
Try another frequency. What is it? It seems as though something's jamming the wavelengths.
Son of Godzilla, a rollicking monster spectacular. See how a baby monster becomes a monstrous monster.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radioheads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. FM's coverage of the Universal Dracula films continues in FM 23 with a look at Son of Dracula, our movie for today's MKR. It starts out right away with the synopsis. Here's a highlight with Chaney's first appearance as Count Alucard, also known as Dracula. Kay is worried about Alucard's non-appearance and consults an old Hungarian priestess named Zimba, who lives in a spooky hut in the swamp region of the Dark Oaks estate. Zimba tells Kay that the Count is an imposter, a living corpse, but before she can explain her incredible revelation, a huge bat swoops through the window, and the ancient crone dies of fright and heart failure. Returning home, Kay finds Frank waiting for her. He has checked records and confirms the dead seer's statement that Alucard is a fraud. The Count is completely unknown at the Hungarian embassy. After the party is over, the doorbell rings. A servant opens the door, and an imposing stranger stands in the entranceway. I am Count Alucard. He, Lon Chaney Jr., announces. That very night, Kay's father is found dead under mysterious circumstances. Unseen, unheard, a killer bat has flown into the mansion and changed into a tall, cloaked figure, attacking the colonel and starting a fire in his room. Then, in the confusion, he vanishes in a wisp of smoke under the window. The next night, after the tragedy, Kay is lured by Alucard to the nearby Dark Oak Swamp, in the vicinity of the family vault. Frank tries to follow her, but is prevented by a fallen tree. In an eerie scene, Kay finds herself by a dark lagoon and views a coffin as it rises inexplicably to the surface of the water, vapor pouring from its interior. The smoke assumes the form of a man. It is Alucard. FM's coverage of Son of Dracula ends with this brief note about the film. This Universal picture was first released in 1943 and was the joint product of the brothers Kurt and Robert Siodmak, the former responsible for the original story on which the screenplay was based, the latter directing it. The film ran 78 minutes in its original form. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
The world's first rock and roll Dracula movie.
The Son of Dracula is Nielsen at his hottest, Ringo at his magical magnificence, horror at its funniest. Dracula, rated PG.
What happens when Dracula has a son? What happens is one of the zaniest, funniest, craziest films of the year. Christopher Lee is back in Dracula and Son. It's all you ever wanted to know about vampires, but were afraid to ask. Don't miss the boys from Transylvania. Dracula and Son. It will bite you in the funny bone. Rated AB positive, RH negative, and PG.
I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome to the podcast devoted to the classic, and sometimes not so classic, genre cinema of yesteryear. And I offer you this warning. Sometimes Derek and his guests get excited, and they may spoil a movie or two. You know how excited monster kids can get sometimes. If Monster Kid Radio spoils a movie for you, do not come whining to me. I cannot stand whines.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Monster Kid Radio again. This is Steve Turek, now being Steve Rivers, Joan Rivers' younger brother, who's subbing in for Derek while he is away in Kuwait with Beth, hopefully having a good time building some haunts that'll scare the pants off of people, or at least put a little shiver in their spine. I'm joined again with Kevin Slick as we are going to be moving into the third part of our Dracula trilogy with Son of Dracula. We did Dracula earlier on Monster Kid Radio and, of course, Dracula's daughter, but now we're heading for the son. And how you doing today, Mr. Slick?
Oh, very good. Very good. I liked your, Steve Rivers thing there. Maybe I should introduce myself as Kevin Slick, not the younger brother of Grace Slick. At a certain point in history, everybody, that was the thing people would ask when they'd find out my name. And they would ask if I was related to, or they would ask if it was a made-up name, because I used to work in radio. A lot of folks might know that Bon Adams and I used to work in radio. And I always tell people, if I was going to make up a name, I wouldn't choose Slick, because that would just be too obvious. I would have called myself Kevin Matthews or something like that. No, not related to Grace Slick at all, or Tom Slick, the cartoon race car driver either. So as far as I know.
Well, if I remember correctly, it was Jeff Owens that joked when I was subbing in for Derek way back in the beginning. He said, "Oh, you're like the Joan Rivers of podcasters," and so I said, "Well, I don't want to be at Joan." I said, "Let me switch it to Steve Rivers." So I have to give Jeff Owens credit for the moniker, and then when Derek does reach out to me, he goes, I need you to be Joan Rivers again. So that kind of thing. So it's kind of an inside joke, and I'm just embrace it. I'm just going to go with the Steve Rivers part.
Well, and for any younger listeners, they might not know the reference that Joan Rivers was like the normal. She was the one that always subbed for Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show when he was out, or she was often the sub. But gosh, how many years has it been since Johnny Carson was at the Tonight Show? Is it 20, 30 years now? 20?
Look at this week. We've been talking about the three movies we talked about for this show were from 1931, 36, and 1943. Johnny Carson was decades after.
Yeah, we're well versed in old people talk here.
I think the people listening to the show that were listening to those movies would know the references, and if not, well, they learned a little something. You're right. There could be some younger people out there, but we're educating them, and that's what you used to be. You used to be an educator, and now you're retired and enjoying life. And I know we talked in the prior episodes about your music and Monster Bash. What is something else you want to bring up about Kevin Slick?
Well, let's see. I do all kinds of creative work, actually. If you were to look for me on like Amazon or some site like that, you would see music, certainly, that you can get. And a lot of that runs a pretty wide gamut from what would be sort of singer-songwriter Americana to bluegrass to traditional American music to symphonic scores for motion pictures or movie scores. There's also stuff that you would find from my group Neo Pseudo, And those of you that have been to Monster Bash, they're often playing music in between films. There's a couple neo-pseudo songs in that collection that Ron has on at Monster Bash, and they're generally the weirdest and craziest sounding ones there. So those are things you could pick up. But also, I have books and visual art and things like that. I guess if you looked at kevinflick.com, you can look at the photography work I do, visual arts I do, comics, graphic design, music, books, T-shirts, whatever kind of thing at the moment. Yeah.
I look at you as a storyteller who uses different mediums of creative. Do you have your creativity go out, whether it's through song, whether it's through photographs, whether it's through other types of artwork, and that is just you have different ways to have those outlets for your different sources. And of course, we can make an argument that what we're doing today is also a creative art, because we're going to be talking about a movie and we're bringing our own points of view to it, which makes it unique to us.
Yeah, I like that. I like the storytelling or the creative aspect. And that's something I, just since we're on Monster Kid Radio here, give another shout out to Derek. I so admire the creative work he does with this podcast and the work that you're doing with the Diecast Movie Podcast. What a creative idea. What an interesting idea. And like the stuff that Derek runs on the Twitch channel, the Monster Kid Film Club. We're living in such a great era right now of technology. I know it can be overwhelming at times to a lot of people, but the fact that you can host a podcast, that you can create a podcast, and people all over the world can listen to Diecast Movie or to Monster Kid Radio, is a fascinating, I think an amazing thing. Or the fact that someone like myself can draw little pictures here in my house and put it together in a book and make it available all over the world, or make music and make it available to everybody on streaming services everywhere. That's fascinating. That's amazing. And, it's fine if what you like to do is read books and go to movies and go for walks and things like that. But if you ever feel like, well, I wish I could be a musician or a songwriter or a movie maker, be that. Do that thing, Look at people like David the Rock Nelson, for crying out loud, just do it and get out there. There's no reason why you can't make stuff available to people and share it with people. And that's a great thing is sharing it with people. Andy Warhol once said that a work of art is never complete until someone has seen it, because that's the important part of it. So I think we're living in a golden age for creativity right now.
Well, I agree with you. And the only thing I want to add on to that is you're never too old or young to start out. So I know some people say, oh, I'm too old. I know many people that have started learning an instrument, a language, or have actually started in films in their 70s, 80s, and so on. So, just if you feel the urge, go for it. Try it. You got nothing to lose.
Exactly. What's the worst that can happen? Yeah.
Exactly. What's the worst that can happen? People say, I could be booed. Well, then you have that experience. It's just that there's going to be people that love what you do, and there are going to be people that hate what you do, regardless of what you do. But I do know this. Son of Dracula from 1943 this was the first time I've seen this movie in a number of years. It's been probably, I would say, at least probably 30 years since the last time I saw Son of Dracula. So I'm glad. That's one of the things people say, why don't I watch these movies more frequently? That the pros and cons of having a podcast about movies is that, yes, there's certain things you want to watch readily, but there's other things, this is probably going to come up on the show, and I want to have maybe more of a fresher take with it. Yeah. So it is kind of like that fine line. Do I want to watch it more frequently or not? And it does make it interesting.
No, I get you totally. I love music, and a lot of the music I really love, I probably don't listen to it as much as I might, because I do a lot of music professionally. A lot of what I end up listening to is well, I'm writing a review of this album, I need to listen to it, or I'm going to be playing with it at a music festival with these artists. I need to get a scope of all the stuff they're doing and things like that. So as I'm sure you do, you're watching movies a lot of time for your podcast. It's kind of like your work, as it were, as opposed to just for fun. But this is a great movie to watch for fun, and we talked about a little bit that these three films, Dracula, Dracula's Daughter, and Son of Dracula. Well, for one thing, you've got the Dracula family, which is kind of fun, and all of these films are ones that people have critiqued in different ways. I hear, some people said, "Well, yeah, Lugosi's great in Dracula, but I don't like it because it's too slow." And we talked a little bit about, well, maybe if you watch the film from a different kind of perspective, it might be different, or Dracula's Daughter doesn't have enough monsters in it, or something like that. Well, maybe it's not a monster movie per se. Maybe it's a dramatic film about relationships. Son of Dracula, I don't know. I've heard numerous things people have critiqued about it, but I think Son of Dracula is, again, a fascinating, fun film. It's another one that is not terribly long. I think we determined it's probably the longest of the three, but it's maybe 80 minutes, thereabouts. Easy to watch in one sitting. I think Lon Chaney Jr. is tremendous as Count Alucard / Dracula. He has a presence that is certainly bigger and bolder than Lugosi. He, again, is in his prime. He's very handsome. He's very commanding, and he's big. He's a bigger character. He's taller. He's like almost a half a head taller than any other male actor in the film. And it's clear, you look at him, he's like, this is a strong guy. You're not going to mess with this guy. But he plays it, for the most part, in such a subtle way. I love the scene where the character that's playing Dr. Brewster, Frank Craven, has come to the house, and he's looking around. He's kind of being sneaky, and Lon Chaney catches him in the basement looking around, and like, what are you doing here? This really smooth, silky voice, and I thought I heard a sound down here, and I love that way. He's like, I too thought I heard a sound, but Catherine and I were married tonight, and I am now master of the house. So you owe me an explanation. Just like, it's clear he's in charge of this situation, but he's being so smooth and in his way, it's like ultra devious, because he is being so smooth in his delivery of it. But it's like, I'm in charge here, and and I'm not going to yell at you, but I'm just going to make it really clear, don't mess with me. I love that. I think that's just a great way of playing that character.
And the setting of it, you have Brewster at the lower part of the stairs, and you have Alucard at the upper part. So not only is he physically imposing normally, but he's now 4 or 5 steps higher up than Brewster's character. And so you have that extra part of intimidation, and with some of this stuff, he's leaning forward a little bit to add that extra emphasis of, like, it's, oh yes, I'm the master of this house. It adds that extra little part. And Frank Craven as Brewster, I loved that voice. His voice. I was just, it was just like perfect for, I don't know, it reminded me of the guy who used to did the voice of Piglet. He was in 12 Angry Men. And it was because I kept thinking, this voice is familiar. And I looked him up in, Wikipedia, looked at other films. I'm like, nah, none of that. And I figured it's got to be, from the same guy that did the voice of Piglet and all this other stuff, who's in 12 Angry Men. A great character actor, but he had also that distinctive voice that's very similar to Frank Craven. And I'm just like, this voice is just amazing because it fits. And when I first heard the last name Brewster, I was wondering immediately want to write the Fright Night. The night, and I'm thinking, I wonder if somebody did this as a homage from Son of Dracula and took the last name and put it as one of the names, the characters in Fright Night, the 1985 one, with Brewster. And I want to check into that and find that out. Like, is that true? Because it's a unique name to suddenly have show up in two films that also involve vampires. I'm thinking it had to be intentional.
Yeah. I love that sort of thing. We're watching one of the shows that we're watching right now, TV shows we're watching right now is Endeavour, a British detective one, and they use a lot of references in there to pop culture and movies and such. And in fact, fans of this program would recognize one of the episodes. They're in a scene where they're looking for a tiger that has escaped from the zoo, and they're walking around in this forest looking for it, and the one person suddenly turns and yells, "It's in the trees! It's coming!" It's like right out of Night of the Demon, and that they put that in there on purpose, and little things like that. I love that when you see that in more recent productions. But yeah, I mean, Craven is wonderful in that role as, the sort of the country doctor, who's been, they set up that feel really well, even though you don't really see the whole town much. But they set up this feeling, and they're like, oh, well, here's this town, and everyone's lived here for a long time. Everybody knows each other. It's all, it's all friendly. It's all this kind of thing. And that plays into the way the film develops too, as things start happening. Everybody knows these characters, like Robert Page as Frank Stanley. It's like, well, everybody knows him. Everyone knows Mr. Frank. What's up with Mr. Frank? And he's, I think he does some wonderful acting in it as well. He goes a bit more over the top than the other characters, and that's perhaps again a fascinating sort of thing where Chaney as Dracula is kind of impassive a lot of the time, until the finale. He's just, I'm in charge. No one can hurt me. Everything, and other people are freaking out and losing their minds. And he's kind of, I got this all under control, so that plays off each other really well. I think they do really well. Yeah, a lot of good characters in it, and people that you will recognize if you've watched movies of this era. Samuel Hines, who plays Judge Simmons. You've seen him in 100 films. He was Jimmy Stewart's father in It's a Wonderful Life, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where he was. But you've seen him play that character before, the sort of, staid, kind of characters, and, not get too excited about anything. Let's just keep things rolling along here.
What I find fascinating about this movie, maybe it's because we're recording this in November, and it's, it's November. Or November, where people are watching, supposed to watch film noir movies or whatever. And I've been watching a few. This movie is very much like a film noir Dracula movie, because you have the normal rotation where you have the Catherine Caldwell, Louise Ballbridden, just playing this role as the female fatale, and just taking these characters, and she brings the demise or the downfall of so many, just using the male characters. Like, she uses Count Alucard, she uses Frank, she's using everybody to get her own means, and is really the one that brings the downfall of all these people. In some ways it's good that the Count gets knocked off, but I mean, poor Frank is suffering for all this trauma going through it, and it's just watching him go through this. You really feel for his character, and I know there was a couple of parts where he goes a little over the top, but then again, when you think you've killed your fiance, and well, technically he did, but I mean not intentionally, and because she comes back as the undead,
And that kind of, and going through that, and you're getting jail, nobody's believing you. You think you basically your mind is not there. So he plays the irrational, and then the way it continues on, it's just there's no way you're recovering from that with, in this time frame, 1940s. You'd end up in an asylum. I mean, you're talking about the rest of your life. You're in therapy. I mean, there's just no way you can recover from dealing with all these things he's got to deal with. And I thought the three of them did very well. And then what I liked about it is he resolved the conflict on his own accord, so to speak. Unlike being directed by the elder statesman type thing, which in a lot of other ones, this one, he utilized what she had said to do to Count Alucard to her and finished it off and ended it. And I thought that was just so well done, and how it was shot, so that style with the shadows and everything. This to me, it's like a horror film, but it's also a noir film. So it's another one that could be a good, as we talked about with Dracula's Daughter, a good gateway for people to like certain types of movies to say, oh, but have you ever seen Son of Dracula? No, but you like Maltese Falcon, you like the Philip Marlowe series of movies, you like all these other ones, Robert Mitchum and so on. This is filmed in a similar to Hangover Square. You would like this type of movie then, and this would be a way for them to realize, oh, and I like this Dracula character. Hey, maybe I want to see these other Dracula movies. So it's a nice gateway.
Yeah, I think the film noir kind of thing is a great observation, because it has that look for sure of films. I mean, you can certainly see it's set in the South. I don't recall that they say it, or if they're in Louisiana or where exactly they are. I don't recall if they say it, but they're around swampland. We know that. So I always picture it as like New Orleans area, like Louisiana, someplace in the bayous or something like that. So, I immediately think of, like, I Walked with a Zombie, Val Lewton film, and some of his film, his use of shadow and filmmaking. And again, it's a really tightly made film. I think Chaney is great as Dracula. I see definitely in his portrayal of this evil character, and he is straight up evil, whereas, like, as we mentioned in Dracula's Daughter, she's conflicted. She's not really sure about being a vampire. He's all in on, this is his plan for the rest of eternity. He plays it again in this way that's kind of very smooth and not overbearing. I see definite references to his father's acting. In Phantom of the Opera, for example, there are scenes where the Phantom is kind of toying with Christine, and he's doing it in this kind of way of like, oh, I'm in charge of everything, and oh, are there people coming here? I wonder who it could be. When he knows, we all know very well, he knows exactly who's coming after him. Oh, I wonder who it could be. So like, and his sort of, and Chaney Jr.'s, I too was wondering about the sound. Playing this kind of casual, he's like the cat and mouse. He's like the cat, playing with the mouse before he devours it. He's doing that really well. And I the last time I watched it, I was definitely seeing that parallel to, especially, the Phantom is a great one with Chaney Sr., but The Unholy Three, he plays a character again where he's sort of like, yeah, I'm toying with you all. I know what's going on, and I know that you don't really know what's happening, but I'm playing with you, and I'm doing this sort of thing. But the look of that film, as you mentioned, is a really great looking, moody, shadow-filled kind of thing. And the character, Catherine Caldwell, Louise Albritton, like, she's some twisted, weird stuff going on with this character. And I love that idea of, yeah, she messes up everybody's life trying to get what she's after. And that could totally, again, just with a few little plot, variations, that could totally be a film noir sort of thing of this, hard-bitten female gangster-like character who's, run the mob or something, and all these guys end up, killed along the way because they were doing her bidding or trying to get her attention or whatever, and they all failed miserably. But yeah, I think it's a great sort of observation. And you mentioned like Robert Mitchum or something like that. Robert Page kind of has that look. I mean, he's totally in that mold of leading actor of that day for the sort of B movie film. He's the good looking guy that and also looks pretty good when his face is all dirty and his hair is all messed up.
Exactly, and this was all foreshadowed at the very beginning of the film when Catherine goes to see the gypsy woman, the queen. I can't remember her last name, but the woman from Hungary. Queen Zimba. The Queen Zimba, and she just basically spells it all out. Like this is the blah blah blah. It's going to be death, weeds, everything. It's all going to be the downfall, and which goes right on through. She called it way. It's almost like she had the script ahead of time. She knew exactly where this was going to go, and she nailed it. So it's foreshadowed. It happened. It's almost like a Greek tragedy where somebody wants to have all these things, and ahead of time this is all going to go bad. It's all fated to go in a bad area.
Yeah, a lot of, and that's what makes a lot of these films, I think, so great. And when I was a kid watching these movies, I'm sure I didn't make the connection to like Greek mythology or things like that. But I think what it is as a kid, I got this idea, and I think a lot of us did, was like, you recognize when you're watching Frankenstein, for example, you recognize that you empathize with the monster as much as you might be terrified with him. And you recognize these kind of iconic story lines or, characters that show up in these kind of stories, whether it's Knights of the Round Table or Sisyphus or some Greek myth or whatever. You recognize, oh yeah, these are stories that I know and I can identify with. They're timeless. And I guess, there's the old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And that's true, perhaps. You just find different ways to tell the same story. But yeah, that's a great observation. Is here's a character who's trying for this thing. She's trying for immortality because apparently she fears death so much that she wants to live forever. And, oh, surprise, surprise, in her quest to live forever, she doesn't even live for the 80 minutes of the movie. She's just before the film's over, because isn't that what always happens? Yeah, you try to cheat death or cheat life, and then you don't get anything out of it.
And as well, she gets her comeuppance relatively within a few days or nights of the situation, depending on how the time passes. It's always hard to tell sometimes in movies how much time, but it is either 1 to 3 nights or days of passage. One thing I want to point out I liked about this film, you can ding it and praise it for one area. Special effects. I'm going to give the praise part. The smoke special effects were done very well. The misting or the smoke and utilized by both vampires well. In 1943, how they set it up, and especially a couple times you see Count Alucard rematerialize. And the first time when he was in the house before he went into the colonel's room, I thought that was done just like zoom, all of a sudden, boom, there he popped right up with his effect. I think that case he was turning from a bat into Count Alucard, and the other times were from smoke. But it did well. Or missed, and how he transferred the bat. I have to ding the bat. They use the bat a lot, and it is a fake bat. So it's almost like I know what they're doing, but it was kind of like. And then I was like, man, they really are. They're really using his bat an awful lot. The best use of the bat was the shadow bat.
The shadow bat works.
The
best one.
But yeah, you're right. That is obviously a fake. And in some of the other films, like in Dracula, when you see the bat, it's very dark, and it's kind of in the distance a little bit. You see this thing sort of flapping. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's a bat. It's not really a bat. I know that, but it's kind of a short little shot. Where here it's like, yeah, they hang on this thing for quite a while, and yeah, I would agree. The smoke thing, I noticed that the sort of the idea of, and this is one of the things that's interesting as you watch through the whole Universal cycle, is they start bringing up different things about these characters. Like in Frankenstein, for example, it's a creature that's made, and then somewhere along about Ghost of Frankenstein, and they say like, oh, well, it can't be destroyed. Like that's a new thing we're going to add to it. And in this one, it's like, okay, well, so you can kill the vampire by a stake through the heart or burning it. Like that wasn't in the earlier ones. And then it's like the vampire can be a bat, a wolf, or it could be mist. We haven't, that's a new idea in Son of Dracula. But I was watching it just the other day with those mist scenes, and a lot of people probably know, watching these shows on Blu-ray, on a big screen, like a 70-inch screen, some of the effects, if it's not really well done, it shows up pretty clearly. Like you can see the strings on the bat, and you can see things like that. I was watching that, a couple of things, was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, is that superimposed on that, or did they, how did they actually make that scene look so good? Because it looks great. Unfortunately, they don't rely on it that much, because that, in some of those films of that era, when they relied too much on the obviously puppet monster or whatever thing like that, it can sort of take away from it. But again, with this, the characters, I think, play it, and I think the character of Catherine is really the lead character of the film. I mean, she's probably in it more than Chaney as Dracula, and as you mentioned, he is kind of a prop for her desires, where she's going. Even though we're used to the idea of Dracula being the one who's running the whole show, she's pretty much running the show, and that's an interesting thing too.
That's what I mean. It's like he's the patsy. He is the mark for her, and I think that's the interesting reveal. Is like, oh, she wants this and that. Oh, I'm going to be the master of the house. Yeah, dude, you think you're the master. It's a shell game. You're going to end up in how, she has the other guy do the work for her, because, as a human, you can do certain things that we can't do. And I just need you to simply light it on fire and put it out and that kind of thing. But unbeknownst to her, he realized, I can get rid of somebody else too. And that's what I think is the best character turn for him, is that he realized, I thought it was so touching when he takes the engagement ring off of his pinky and puts it on her. And at that moment, if you hadn't seen the movie before, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have, and Derek, I'm sure, put the spoiler warning up prior to this, you think that she's what? Like he's putting it on her. Now I'm going to be your husband and you're going to be my wife. I'm going to, we're going to do this together. I'll see you in the morning. And then when you see Brewster and the posse come up, and then they turn and they see the whole thing on a blaze, you realize it was just his way of saying goodbye to her and then ending it on forever. But it's such a touching scene how he was, Robert Page did such an excellent job of showing that pathos and going through it. And that's what I like about these three movies, is that each one of them is following in a different type of perspective, or different, you can look at them in different ways and realize them. And I think that's what makes them unique, where nowadays a lot of movies, when they do sequels to it, they try to do roughly the same thing. And some people want that. There's people, like you look at the Halloween series, when it came out, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, a lot of people, were like the villagers trying to burn down the castle. when that movie came out. But then when you look at it in retrospect, it's a good movie that was just a different theme, had a different approach. But some people like that same thing over and over, and other people want to see things that are roughly the same but done in a different motif. To go with your art background, there's sometimes you want to paint in watercolors, and there's sometimes you want to paint with different material, or you don't want to paint at all, and you want to maybe use clay. I mean, you're coming up with roughly the same image. Maybe you're doing like a sculpture, and the other time you're painting a portrait of somebody. It's the same kind of thing, but with two different focuses, and it has two different impressions on the viewer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important with these films in particular, because these are older films, and folks listening to this podcast obviously are here for the older films, the classic films, and even with that, sometimes they can appear outdated or archaic or something like that. The acting, again, might appear not very good because we're looking at it through a different lens. And I think one of our goals here was to take a look at these three films and say, here's some ways to look at them that might be different than what you're thinking. And certainly, again, if you're someone who's regularly going to see current horror films, and I think it's a great thing to do that too. Daniel Roebuck at Monster Bash, the last time that he was here last summer, I guess it was, really talked about. He was particularly referring to people that were bad-mouthing the Munster movie and putting it down and things like that. And he was saying, like, why are you doing this? Because there's not that many of us out there, and there's not that many people making films in this kind of genre at all. Like, why argue and put it down and be like a gatekeeper or something like that? I think it's always best if you can just broaden your interest and broaden your sort of experience to, like, here's how you can, in the same way that, like, when people say to me, I like all kinds of music except, and then they'll put in something, country, opera, rap, whatever, I'm immediately turned off, because I'm thinking, well, you're probably not really listening to that music in a very intelligent and informed way then. And so the same thing with movies. If there's a character that's interesting in the film I can get into, I will watch it, and I love watching it. And I love a lot of these films, maybe partly because there's not a huge amount of quote, monster content, like the monsters on the screen wrecking everything, and I have every kaiju film ever made, I think, because I love Godzilla trampling, model sets and things like that. These are very different sort of films. As you said, this film totally fit within like a 1940s film noir, Philip Marlowe kind of thing. You could show the fact that that's probably a cool idea is, I think maybe I'll put together, maybe invite some friends over and show like the Maltese Falcon, maybe, I don't know, The Big Sleep and this, and Son of Dracula as a trilogy or something like that, or Night of the Hunter or something like that, put them all as like a trilogy sort of thing. That could be kind of cool to see it very much in that context. But whatever, just have fun with it. Just watch movies like this and have fun with it.
And that's the thing. It fits in those areas, and it's like when you do those diagrams, what they call the Venn diagrams, where you have this overlap.
Venn diagram, yeah.
Per purpose.
Yeah.
This is one of those movies that overlaps with that genre and hits other genres, and how much that circle hits in the horror genre or the film noir genre. I think it's more noir than horror. But then again, other people, with their prism of looking at it, are going to say, no, it's definitely all this, and it could be fake, and I'm totally crazy. But hey, that's fine. That's the great thing. It's like when you create something, and as an artist, and somebody goes to look at it, you had your mind one thing, But once it's out there and other people are starting to look at it, they're going to be looking at it through their prism and they're going to interpret it differently. It doesn't mean they're right or wrong. It just means that they're going to view it in a different manner than you. And sometimes as the creator's like, oh yeah, I never thought of it could be also done that way. And it's like, I like the way you're looking at it. And it's something that I was not intending, but I can see where that is. Where other people, on the other hand, are like, no, it's supposed to be this. And I think that's what Daniel Roebuck and you were just talking about with current films, when people say, no, it's supposed to be like this. And instead of looking at it as, no, it's just a different approach. And if you want these things to keep growing, if you want to have a younger audience that keeps these things happening, you have to be able to bend and realize that it's not always, the films of the 30s are not the same as the films of the 40s, the 50s, and so on. I mean, every decade is different, yet we can look back at these films that we grew up watching that were from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s, and are perfectly fine with all these huge differences, because when we saw them, we saw them all at that same span, depending, you might have saw a movie from the 30s, the 50s, and the 40s all in the same day. On a rainy Saturday, you stayed at home and you were just watching TV all day, and you saw those movies. Yeah. And to you, that happened in 1974. Let's say, 1974. That was the movies I saw, not realizing they're decades earlier. So your thing is blurred because of that. And then when you look at films that come out nowadays, you're thinking, well, they're not like those films I saw before. Well, no joke, they're not. It's just the way it is.
Well, the context of the movie too, that's huge. We didn't even talk about that in this situation, but I mean, here's a fascinating angle to think about. So Count Alucard, Count Dracula, is coming from Europe, and he's coming to America because America is this land of opportunity for him to pillage, because his own land has already been devastated. Well, when did this film come out? What was going on in the world in 1943? Europe was being decimated in World War II. Nazi Germany had destroyed a healthy swath of Europe at that point. America would be a place we'd want to come to, or America would be the place that people feared that some kind of evil force was going to come here and try to destroy us. I don't know how much that played into people's thinking at that time, but I'm sure it had to be a different aspect going to a movie like that, going to a movie theater. And, earlier in the day, if you would have been reading the newspaper, you would have been reading about horrible, destruction in World War II going on all over the world, literally. And now I'm reading about some evil thing or person coming from someplace else to hear. That's, wow, that's a big part of the whole idea. And I don't know how that played out at the time, but it's certainly fascinating when I watch films like that now to think about what kind of experience were people bringing to the movie theater when they saw that.
Exactly. And then not just the film goers, but also the people creating it, the director, the screenwriter, the producers, they're living through that. And it's just like, I'm sure when you do certain music, when you're creating something, you're creating stuff that and so the things that are happening in your life at that time are going to affect you and what you're creating at that particular moment. And it's when you look back at songs, movies, TV shows, whatever, you are getting snapshots of what the mores and attitudes and the current event situations were at those particular time frames. Now, with movies, it could sometimes be a little skewered in that movie could be made one year and come out a year or two later. It might not come out that same year, so it could be a little thrown off in that, but it's still roughly that same thing. And that's why I find fascinating. There are things we could have talked about this movie and the other movies that we could have brought up, and there's a lot of films in this time frame which people can say doesn't fit a modern sensibility. But my point is, by it being there, we know what we were like then, and you can see where we are now, and you can see, you can use it as a test. Are we getting better or worse, or things staying the same?
Yeah. And ultimately it goes down to characters, as we talked about in any story. Are the characters interesting? And I think in all of these films, you have interesting characters who are doing very human things, even though we're talking about supernatural characters for the most part. These are people, often you've got people whose desires for one thing or another, their search for gold, their search for riches or immortality or whatever like that ends up destroying them. And that's the reason people have told stories like that for thousands of years is because we can all relate to it.
Oh, and then I think that's the best thing when you create something that can be relatable to a lot of people, and again, it's not going to relate to everybody, but you can't please everybody. So you try to please yourself as an artist and then hope that the majority of the people or a good portion of the people enjoy what you created.
Yeah.
And I hope in listeners that you enjoyed what Kevin and I created with Son of Dracula, and I hope you enjoyed Dracula's Daughter and Dracula that we've done for Monster Kid Radio. And leave Derek feedback if you want us to continue on and do other movies, because there are 2 Dracula movies, actually 3 if you count, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. There's House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein. So I think there's several more there in the Universal part, and then there's other movies on top of that. So if you want us to come on again, let us know. Derek will let me know, and if I'm still recording episodes to fill in for Kuwait, and that kind of stuff. Or down the road, if Derek comes back, if he needs more fill-ins, we'll know where you guys want us to go. Please let us know. And if you want to follow the stuff that Kevin's up to, kevinslick.com. But thank you again, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks.
And Derek, I hope everything's going well, and thank you again for letting me guest host. Everybody have a good day.
You know that Steve produces the Diecast Movie Podcast, right? You can find it on all of your podcast directories, so go check that out. And check out Kevin Slick at kevinslick.com. There's also links to his YouTube page over there as well. I've got links to all of this over at monsterkidradio.net, where you're going to find the show notes and everything else we've talked about here on the show, including our contact information. Once again, our voicemail line is area code 360-524-2484, or you can email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com. If you've got anything you'd like to talk about that you've heard on the show, anything that's coming up, that sort of thing, I would love to be able to promote it here on the show. Speaking of things coming up, the band the Meteoroids have a show coming up at the Sardine in Los Angeles on February 29th at 7:30 p.m. Check out the Sardine over at 1101 South Pacific Avenue in L.A. And check out the band and the other bands they're playing with, and make sure you let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. What's coming up next week on the show? I am not 100% sure. I've got a couple of things in the works. I do want to get back into the swing of things, but I suspect we're going to get one more episode guest hosted or Joan Rivers'd by Steve Turek. So pay attention to Monster Kid Radio on Facebook, because this is where I'll be making the announcement about what's coming up on the next episode of MKR. We'll definitely do one more episode done by Steve. And then we're back to normal, or Abby normal. As Abby normal as it can get around here. I've mentioned this at the end of the last episode. I'm currently looking for work. And while I do have a few nibbles, I've got a few interviews. One interview lined up. Hopefully by the time this goes out and you've listened to it, I'll have one or two more. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that I can get back to work here soon, as well as help get Beth squared away. She did suffer an injury in Kuwait, partially torn ACL and MCL, and there will probably be some surgical intervention required. So my life is still not evened out, and, we're hustling. We're trying to get a lot done. We want to make it all happen, and all of it includes getting Beth signed up with another haunt. If there is a good haunt in your neck of the woods, please email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com and let me know, and I'll pass their information on to Beth, because we're not above moving. We will happily relocate to get into working for another haunt and get Beth managing and designing and consulting, and I'd be her cute-ish sidekick, assistant, minion, PA. I don't know what you'd call me. Intern, not anyway. We're not above relocating. So if there is a haunt in your area, or you just want to see Monster Kid Radio's Derek and Beth move closer to you, email me with information about your haunt, and we'll check it out and see if they could use the services of Team Death and the American Haunters. I just mentioned Team Death. I'm selling some shirts now. I actually have a big cartel page set up, which makes selling these Hawaiian-style shirts so much easier. If you want that Crestwood House Monster Tribute Hawaiian-style shirt, the Monster Movie lobby card or one-sheet collage Hawaiian-style shirt, the 3D glasses shirt, you can pick those up at teamdeath.bigcartel.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. Also, we have a TeePublic shop. Look up Monster Kid Radio over at teepublic.com. Last week, I released a new shirt to celebrate our episode about Dracula's daughter. So go check out that as well and get yourself some merch to help promote Monster Kid Radio and help support Monster Kid Radio in the process. The other thing that you can do is use the Amazon affiliate link over at monsterkidradio.net. Click on the Frankenstein monster with the big A in his middle, and that'll take you to Amazon. We get a couple of pennies off every purchase you make over there. It doesn't cost you anything more. Just helps us out a little bit as well. You can also find links to our Discord and our Patreon and our Reddit. Not a lot of activity over on our Reddit board. I'd like to fix that. If you're a Reddit user, why don't you check out Monster Kid Radio's Reddit? Chat it up. Start talking about monster movies with other Redditors. Let's get that community growing as well. Like I said at the top of the show, we've been going for over a decade, but I really feel like there's more room to grow here. I want Monster Kid Radio to get bigger because I want a bigger audience, because I want to talk to more people, and I just want more people to be aware of these classic monster movies, or even the not-so-classic ones. Spread the word. Don't let them get forgotten, Let's talk about them with our friends and make some new ones along the way. All right, that's it. Let's go ahead and wrap up by reminding you that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed at a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 onboarded license, except that doesn't apply to the song Dig It. That is copyright 2024. The Meteoroids, you can pick it up off their debut album, The Meteoroids, at themeteoroids.bandcamp.com, or look them up on Instagram or Facebook. And remember, they're playing live this Thursday, February 29th at 7:30 at the Sardine in Los Angeles, California. I'll make sure there's a link to the Facebook event page in the show notes at monsterkidradio.net. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next time. Ciao.